Today I'm going to be talking about blending shadows and highlights on a figure with two techniques, wet in wet and layered blending. These are one of the most important aspects of miniature painting, aside from the paint and the miniature. A high quality brush will retain its point, hold more paint, and generally last a lot longer than some of the others that you might see. Keep your eye out for Kolinsky sables, they tend to be the best. Here are some of the brands in Kolinsky sables that I have and regularly use. The next essential bit of kit I have on my workbench is a wet palette. You can make your own or you can buy them. This one I've made from a sandwich box, and I've used De La Rowney Stay Wet palette refills. These consist of a membrane which the water can seep through and some reservoir paper, which is basically just a absorbent paper like a blotting paper. People use tissue as well. Paints I'll be using today are Vallejo model colour, ranging from dark to light, black, hull red, blue, dark vermilion, deep yellow and ivory. This will give me the full range for the red cloak on the figure. I've mixed some hull red and dark vermilion into an intermediate mid-tone for the figure. With a wide brush I'll begin brushing in the areas It's best for the paint to be quite wet when you're doing this. Okay. As this is a demo, the figure is going to be stripped and repainted in the future. Okay. So for this side I'm going to be doing wet blending. So my paint is nice and wet. I'm not worried about accuracy today. This works equally well on smaller figures, just for tidiness, and yeah, divide the figure down by the sash. Okay, so here we have a wet coat of paint. On this base coat I'm going to start the next stage by adding some shadows. For this I will use pure whole red, just to draw in some of the darker areas. I'm still using my big brush, and as the paint is still wet you can graduate in darker tones fairly easily. So under the creases. This is a fairly quick technique, but can also be very effective. Again with a pure whole red. As you can see, the subtle graduation from light to dark is starting, and you can brush over areas to increase the blend if needs be. Okay, next step, I'll be using a smaller brush, 2-0 Raphael Kolinsky. I'm going to be using whole red with a little bit of blue and a dash of black and a little bit more dark vermilion, just to keep the red tone in the shadow. So for this stage the paint is still wet. In the deepest creases I will work my shadow tone, being careful to blend it as I'm going, following the lines of the creases in areas that I wish to blend. As you can see, some lighter colour has pooled up here, but that's not a big problem because we can add in some paint. The paint is still very wet. It's almost like working with oils. You need to be confident with where you're going how much shade you're going to be putting onto the figure. Tend to focus contrast on the upper shoulders of the torso by the face. So here again, I'm adding some more shading lower down. If you lose a highlight, it's not the end of the world. Here I'm just adding more of that mix of black, blue, dark Prussian and Hull red, working it into the deepest crevices. Now I'm going to go for a darker mix still, a lot more black, so it's almost like a dark black violet. And this mix is going to be painted onto the extremes. So the paint is still wet. I'm adding darker layers into the mid layers. It's a very effective way of shading an area of your figure very quickly and effectively. Need some more highlight up there because I just blended it away. Mistakes will be made, but it's something that's to be practiced. It looks quite garish here, but in person it looks quite nice. You can add more shadows, really up the contrast of the figure. This works for smaller figures as well. Just reduce your scale. Okay. The next step is going to be the highlights of the figure. I'm going to be using, to start with, pure dark vermilion. The figure is still wet. You probably see by the sheen. These are acrylics as well, Vallejo acrylics. To start with, I'm going to work some highlights, lightly brushing them in. They're slowly blending into the upper portions of the figure. Red's a horrible colour to highlight. That's why I've got yellow and ivory on my palette. Yellow will maintain the brightness of the red when you're painting it, so you don't end up with a pink highlight, which is what you don't want. You want a highlight, not a pink. As you can see, I'm brushing in the pure dark vermilion onto the bits that would catch the light. On the top of the shoulder. Yeah, I'm going to add some yellow and white for the extreme highlights here, or yellow and ivory. So you're basically mixing up a light bright orange And on this I'm going to use it just on the extremes. You may lose some of the red, but you can re-establish that by glazing later on. Okay, it's looking a bit more pinky than I would have liked, but that's the basics of wet blending. I'm going to dry it with a hairdryer and show you the results. Okay, now the paint is dry, and this is the blending. It's a bit rough on the shoulder there, but that gives you an idea of wet in wet blending. Now for the next stage, I will be doing layered blending. Same palette, different side of the jacket. So once again, I will be mixing a base coat of whole red and dark vermilion and coating the figure. This technique requires more time, as you're effectively needing to dry the figure. I don't think I'll do the whole side with this technique because it takes a while, but I'll give you a rough idea. Just re-wet the brush. The wet palette's great because it keeps the paint wet on the palette, as the name implies. It's great for mixing colours. You can put the lid on it and come back to it in 2 days and the paint's still there, ready to go, as long as it's airtight. That's the important thing. Oh, messy, messy, messy. Okay. For this exercise I will be using a hairdryer, so the video will skip a little bit every now and again. After 3 coats or so, I'm still a little bit wet. I'm going to focus on layered blending. We're going to start with the highlights. So I'm mixing a little bit of red with a tiny bit of yellow this time on the areas where I believe highlights I want to be. The paint is very, very thin. That's one of the key things for layering highlights. They've got to be very, very thin. And it's easy to build up a sheen with layered paints when you're doing this as well. So you work on the areas you want lighter. The paint is so thin it basically, it's almost like almost a glaze, but not quite on the sections you want them to be highlighted. I'm going to build up a bit of opacity here. A bit more water on my brush. It's quite warm from having the hairdryer on for a little while, drying this figure. Okay. So what you're doing every time is building up a layer that's either slightly darker or slightly lighter than the previous shade. Okay, I'll do the next. The next layer I'm going for slightly more orangey. Mix. I'm working on the areas where I want the extreme highlights to be. I'm going to be focusing on this corner. So, whilst that one's drying, I'm going to cut in some shadow, which will be dark vermilion mixed with whole red. This will act as like a base layer, again, to reinforce that colour, so the colours are very thin. You want to pay attention to how the light falls on the figure when you do this. If you need to feather the edge of a shadow or highlight you're doing, just wet your brush and run over where you've done. So this is almost working the first shadow slash mid-tone. Again. The dark vermilion mixed with whole red. Okay. Just dry. Some shadows starting to formulate. I'm going to add a very lighter red to the top of the crease that's visible. This technique is all about building up and blending layers. So, a little bit of whole red, a little bit of dark vermilion, and a little bit of blue next. Blue or violet is a good colour to put into shadows because it pushes the colour back, being a colder colour. I'm going to work down here underneath this piece, adding in the light start of a shadow. Paint's very thin. This section here, do some shading. You don't always want the shadow to blend perfectly. Some creases are very sharp. You can slowly see the areas getting darker as I paint them. Well, this isn't perfect. I hope it's given you a nice idea of how to build up highlights and shadows. I'm going darker and darker with each layer and becoming more selective with where I'm applying the colours. I feel I need to bring the highlights on the top a bit more. This time I'm going for some pure dark vermilion to try and reinforce the red and the brightness of the red. and where it's been lightened underneath, it's pushing that red forward, giving it a bit more vibrancy. So you can see this section, I'm not going to do all of it, it'll take forever. So it's really starting to come into its own. Thin glazed layers. If you feel like the shadow is too dark, you can always put a glaze of your base colour over it. Bring it together. I tend to use wet blending a lot more now because it's quick, easy and very effective with less hassle, but you need to be quick and confident with where you're going. I'll dry this and we'll have a look. Okay, so it's dry. The contrast is a lot higher on the layered blending. I could have put more reds into the wet blending and made that brighter. They both give you the same result if you put the same amount of paint in. So there you are, that's layered blending and wet blending on lovely figure, I believe done by Mitch's and given to competition entrants for Euro. Now I haven't been to Euro yet, a friend gave me this, I'm really grateful. If anybody can guess, or anybody who knows who the character is, I do, let me know in the comments.